till we meet tomorrow. Good night, sweetheart.
Sulu is injured when a time distortion strikes the ship and his console erupts. McCoy is summoned to the bridge to treat him with a dose of a potentially dangerous drug. McCoy successfully administers the correct dosage and heals Sulu, but another bout of turbulence causes him to accidentally inject himself with the entire vial. In a state of frenzied paranoia, the heavily drugged doctor makes an escape for the transporter room and escapes down to the adjacent planet's surface. Kirk takes a landing party down to the uninhabited planet where they find a mass of ruins, among which is a large archway chiseled out of stone. They discover that the archway is the source of the time distortions. The archway then begins to speak, introducing itself as the Guardian of Forever. It seems to be an ancient artificial intelligence, as well as a gateway through time and space itself. As the Guardian shows them Earth's history, McCoy makes a break for it and runs through the portal before the landing party can stop him. Suddenly, Uhura reveals that she can no longer contact the Enterprise. The Guardian reveals to them that by going back in time, McCoy altered history, and therefore their present has been changed as well. Stranded on the empty planet with no hope of rescue, and most likely to disappear a la Back to the Future, Kirk and Spock decide to follow McCoy into the gateway, a week ahead of his arrival, and retrieve him, hopefully preventing him from altering the past. Kirk and Spock arrive in New York City in 1930, during the Great Depression. We've returned to the Mayberry set. You can see Floyd's barbershop in some shots. Jim and Spock immediately realize they stick out in their bright uniforms, especially Spock with his Vulcan ears. While stealing some clothes to camouflage themselves, they are caught by a policeman. Jim gives a rather interesting explanation for Spock's appearance.
I see you've noticed the ears. They're actually easy to explain.
Perhaps the unfortunate accident I had as a child.
The unfortunate accident he had as a child. He caught his head in a mechanical rice picker.
They decide to quit while they're behind and nerve pinch the cops so they can make a break for it. They hide out in the basement of a soup kitchen to change. This is the first of many occurrences of Spock wearing various headwear to hide his ears while undercover. Soon they are discovered by a woman in an apron. Yes, that is the Joan Collins.
I was just visiting the babies and I realized I was thirsty. I wondered if you had any cold champagne.
Well, nothing open.
Well, that's one of life's easier problems to remedy, isn't it, Hilda?
She introduces herself as Edith Keeler and offers to hire them at the soup kitchen, since Jim and Spock will be needing money to feed themselves while they wait for McCoy, and also so Spock can build a rudimentary computer for him to determine how McCoy will change the flow of time. As Jim and Spock sit down to eat with several others at the mission, Edith gets up to give a motivational speech. The guy sitting next to Kirk starts to make a crude comment about her.
Not that she's a bad-looking broad, but, if she really wanted to help out a fella in need...
Shut up. Shut up.
James Kirk, space feminist. As Edith talks about hope and the future, unknowingly describing Kirk and Spock's very reality, Jim is visibly impressed by her words and her determined attitude. Edith is clearly a woman ahead of her time. She helps the two of them find a place to stay, where Spock starts construction on his computer, despite the antiquated technology available to him. Edith catches Spock and Jim borrowing a toolkit from the mission basement and notes how out of place Jim and Spock are. Edith agrees to overlook the theft if Kirk walks her home, and romance blossoms between them. Meanwhile, Spock has gotten his computer working and has discovered two conflicting newspaper articles, one from 6 years in the future about Edith meeting President Roosevelt, and one from 1930 stating her obituary. Now they know that she is the focal point of the change in history. They just don't know how. McCoy finally arrives, still drugged and confused. He encounters the man from the mission Kirk had scolded earlier and passes out in an alleyway. The man steals his hand phaser and accidentally disintegrates himself. The next morning, McCoy stumbles into the soup kitchen and Edith takes him to the back room to lie down, just missing Spock. Spock finally figures out that in the altered timeline, Edith Keeler's pacifist ideals have such influence that America is dissuaded from getting involved in World War II, allowing the Nazis to develop the atomic bomb and the Axis powers to conquer the world. To save the world, and their future, Spock states that Edith Keeler has to die, much to Jim's anguish, as he's developed intense feelings for Edith. Outside their room, Jim catches Edith when she trips on the stairs, while Spock looks on sorrowfully.
Save her. Do as your heart tells you to do. And millions will die who did not die before.
The clock on Edith Keeler's life is running down, and when the last second ticks by, will Jim have the strength to let the clock run out? Later on, Jim is taking Edith on a date to a Clark Gable movie when Edith offhandedly mentions McCoy, who's finally recovered from his cordrazine overdose. Jim jumps at attention at the mention of McCoy's name. At that moment, McCoy comes out of the mission and Jim and Spock run across the busy street to greet him. Edith follows after Kirk, and... Before McCoy can instinctively step off the pavement to intervene, Jim holds on to him, letting it happen. Edith is gone.
Deliberately stop me, Jim. I could have saved her. Do you know what you just did? He knows, Doctor. He knows.
Kirk, Spock, and McCoy return to the 23rd century to find everything back as it should be. Jim doesn't tell the others what happened in the past, even though they can tell something's wrong. Jim only says,
Let's get the hell out of here.
in the infancy of theater, in the days of playwrights like Aeschylus and Sophocles, tragedy was defined by the hero's demise coming from their own fatal flaws, usually hubris. In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus is warned by the soothsayer Tiresias not to go digging into who murdered the former king. In ignoring those warnings, Oedipus is horrified to discover the truth, and gouges his own eyes out as a result. To quote Shakespeare, "The fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves." If I had to assign James Kirk a fatal flaw, it would be that his heart is too big, that he loves others to the extent that he destroys himself in the process. And there's no greater example of that than this episode. It's been stated before that Jim will never be allowed to have a long-lasting romantic relationship due to his duties as a Starfleet officer. He is married to the Enterprise, and her crew's well-being is his obligation. Star Trek is a fictional universe that hinges on the principle of utilitarianism, doing what's best for the maximum amount of people, meeting the needs of the many. In philosophy, there's a thought experiment you've probably heard of before. The trolley problem. Imagine a trolley rolling non-stop down a track, with 5 people tied to the rails about to be mowed over. There's no way to stop the trolley or untie the people in time. There is, however, a switch device next to you, allowing you to switch the trolley to another track, with only one person tied down. You have a choice. Do nothing and let 5 people die, or use the switch device and kill one person in their place. This is essentially the choice Jim is forced to make in this episode. Save Edith and let countless lives be destroyed as a result, including those of his own crewmates, or let her go. To borrow a phrase,
You have a choice. You don't have a good choice, but you have a choice.
the genius of this episode is in the intermingling of the sweet romance between Jim and Edith, and the slowly building dread leading up to her death. Alfred Hitchcock perfected the art of mounting tension in storytelling with his bomb-under-the-table method. Rather than having a bomb suddenly go off in the middle of a scene, shocking the audience for 5 seconds, instead show them at the beginning that a bomb's been hidden under the table, letting the audience grow more and more uneasy every second that ticks by. In the same way, Kirk and Spock are told, as is the audience, that Edith Keeler's death is imminent, and we are left to sit on the edge of our seats and wait for tragedy to strike. The butterfly effect, or the idea that even the smallest of actions can affect the greatest of outcomes, has been an idea since at least the early 19th century. In The Vocation of Man by Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Fichte says, "You cannot remove a single grain of sand from its place without thereby changing something throughout all parts of the immeasurable whole." I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Ray Bradbury's short story A Sound of Thunder influenced Harlan Ellison's original teleplay for the episode. A Sound of Thunder describes a team of time travelers who change their own future by accidentally killing a butterfly in the Cretaceous period, including the election of a fascist into power. As touching and well executed as this episode is, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to talk about the practice of fridging in fiction. Fridging was a term first coined by writer Gail Simone in 1999 to describe the habitual killing off of female characters for the sole purpose of spurring male protagonists into action. The term came from a 1994 Green Lantern comic, in which Lantern Kyle Rayner returns home to find his girlfriend's corpse stuffed in the fridge by his enemy. This is the main motivation for Kratos, the main character of the God of War video games, whose wife and daughter are killed by Ares. It's also a particularly favorite plot device of showrunner Eric Kripke. It reinforces the idea that women are passive agents that stories just happen to, rather than giving them agency in their own narratives. Edith is never told about her fate by Jim or Spock. She never chooses to sacrifice herself. She's never allowed to make a choice at all. Her fate is chosen for her by Kirk. What's worse is that she's made to act out of character in order for her death to happen. Why would such a brilliant and insightful woman walk into a busy street without looking? But that's just a small contrivance in the grand scheme of the episode. The mixing of elements of love and loss, fate versus free will, the ramifications of time travel, all in a seamlessly beautiful story that withstands the test of time. Many episodes of the original series are only remembered for their sheer ridiculousness, or the tropes they create, or forgotten altogether, but City is still a pivotal entry in the Trek pantheon. I know a lot of you expect me to talk about the infamous feud between Gene Roddenberry and Harlan Ellison that happened during the production of this episode. All but a few lines of Ellison's original teleplay were rewritten by an uncredited DC Fontana and other writers. However, it seems gauche to bring up in a video about such a seminal and poignant episode, so you'll forgive me if I don't unpack the behind-the-scenes minutiae. Feel free to wax poetic about it in the comments. For me, the most important thing I take away from the episode is Edith herself. She is the Irene Adler of Star Trek, only here for one story, but so bright and excellent that she can't be forgotten. Her legacy can't be denied, but she deserves so much more than to just be remembered as Kirk's girlfriend who dies at the end of the episode. City takes place in the 1930s, a time in American history that was marked by hopelessness and despair. 90 years later, we're finding ourselves in a similar situation, with a horrible disease that's killing hundreds by the day, an economic crisis that seems totally irreparable, a rise in violent nationalism, and a planet that's slowly burning. The knowledge that my generation quite possibly might not survive to see our grandchildren is gut-wrenching. It's easy to sink into the existential desolation of it all. But when I find myself slipping into depression, I remember the words of an idealistic soup kitchen owner, a flame of hope that burned out before her time, and I find the courage to keep moving forward.
Now, I don't pretend to tell you how to find happiness and love when every day is just a struggle to survive. But I do insist that you do survive, because the days and the years ahead are worth living for.
Though I'm not beside you, good night, sweetheart. Still my love will guide.